Hello, everybody. Oh, it's so good to see you again. That is virtually. I apologize for last Tuesday. Very strange thing happened. I got like the worst headache I'd ever had. I think I had headaches as a kid, but I don't get many headaches. But this just hit suddenly, and it's like I mean, I didn't need to go to the hospital, but I thought I better get home. So turns out it might have been a mind body experience, meaning stress or something. But it went away. I ate a little something. I fell asleep at about 6 o'clock and then I felt a little bit better. So could be stress. It shows you how powerful that is. So the other strange thing that happened is as I was doing the 12-step recovery for sexaholics, or for sexual addiction recovery, that got streamed to this channel by accident. So then I took that and moved it over. So some of you got kind of a preview. So we're actually a little bit behind, but we'll be fine. So tonight we're going to make amends. We have admitted powerlessness over any of our addictions, whether it be alcohol or drugs or overeating or overspending or undereating, underspending, compulsive fixing, codependency, work addiction, etc. Almost any kind of compulsion where you're using the substance and you can't stop. And it's numbing emotion. It's an addiction recovery process. We've admitted powerlessness. We believe that God will restore us to sanity. We look at how we need to turn our whole life over to the care of God. And then we did our 4th-step amends, where we are looking at what is the big things that block us from his power, which is resentments, fears, selfishness, dishonesty, and last but not least, it's things we need to make right with people. If we don't ask for forgiveness or try to mend these relationships, we will be blocked. We just won't be able to do that. So yeah, so we're focusing on step 8 and 9 on our book here. I'm fixing things a little bit better every day with the software we're using. We don't have as many banners, and eventually we'll probably purchase it. But so we're in page 76. And if we go down to I think the second paragraph, it says, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. That's step 4, by the way. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage in the past. So the question is, like, how do we repair the damage? What is it that we're doing? Well, what it's not is just the simple "I'm sorry." It may involve that, but it's really seeking to mend the relationship. I like the word amends because you're mending the relationship. Sometimes the best way to mend it is by not interacting just quite yet. Get some sobriety. But the tricky thing is that the 12-step book would tell us, the big book would say, you're really never going to get sober unless you make amends. So I would say in most every case, it's better to make amends. I think what we'll do is talk. I'm going to hop a little bit different around and then get to the book tonight. But, the question is, why do we make amends? because it's the right thing to do. It's really important to do. But is there kind of a practical reason um, we make amends? Yes. In fact, it's so important that in the early days, Dr. Bob, in his story, there was one person he didn't make amends to, and he did not get sober, but more than a month. If a person makes amends, they'll stay sober. And it's really important. And I have to be better at that in my life. I try to look at my life and say, okay, are there people I've harmed? Or do I know people have something against me? What can I do to remedy that situation? Because, in other words, otherwise, I'm just stiff arming the grace of God. But the practical reason is because broken relationships block God's grace. And people are amazed, like, really? So this has everything to do with my overeating or my overspending or sexual addiction or compulsive gambling? Yes. And they go, well, shouldn't I get sober first and then I go apologize? It doesn't work that way. This has everything to do with I need God's grace. The only way to get it is to follow these simple principles. And if I go to God, as in the Bible, Jesus says, you bring your gift to the altar. But if you know someone has something against you or you have something against them, go to that person and be reconciled. I heard something quite interesting this week. I was listening to a podcast by an Orthodox priest who is so different than where I've been watching things lately. He's in Georgia and he interviewed an anthropologist, but she said something pretty profound. I was actually really enjoying the conversation. She said, isn't it hard to love people? They were saying it's the hardest thing in the world to do. It's a simple thing. Love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. Love everybody as yourself. Everybody. Simple. It's not complicated. It's the hardest thing in the world to do. And I think that's a good word because we realize there's spiritual forces keeping us from that. I began to think and ponder this, like we applaud people by climbing a mountain. They could be blind even while climbing this. All these feats that people do. Maybe they went from rags to riches, or they lost maybe 100 pounds, or things that we just go, wow, that's awesome. Like there's a show called Alone where people are out in the middle of nowhere trying to live by themselves and see how long they can last without starving to death. But all that to say, the hardest thing is to truly love people the way God wants us to love them. And it made me really think this really ties in with making amends. That's why it's a scary, humbling thing to do, but it's a really, really good thing to do. And if I did this with every person I've harmed, then how much better would I be closer to God? And I think it's one of those secrets that people are unaware of. I think we just think, oh, we need to do other things. Let's talk about the types of amends. There's 4 basic types of amends that the AA book speaks about. Direct. That would be eyeball to eyeball. And so in the early days, people went to the people they harmed and they had a list right there. And it didn't even have to relate to drinking. It could have been, I lied to you, or I thought negative thoughts to you, or I've been disrespectful to you. It could have been something big like an affair, or I took money from the corporate expense account. I was dishonest about this. And as we'll read together, some of these people were fearful of going to jail, but they had to follow God as opposed to just following their own self-directed, selfish will. So direct amends. Indirect amends is not in person. So I kind of consider direct is kind of a phone call, but it starts becoming more indirect amends when it might be a letter. It might be a phone call. I don't believe in making amends through texting and email. It's the worst form of communication. But I did make one amends through an email initially through Facebook because it was the only way I could find the person to make amends. Or well, I'd say a convenient way. And we'll talk more about what is indirect amends later. Amends in kind. This has to do with, if say like I had, I'm making this up, but a son who I totally mistreated, he dies a horrible death. Yeah, maybe it's just that awful. So what am I going to do? It's the idea that the next person in my life that could be son-like to me, I would then try to treat with so much more respect, and I'd be sober. So it's kind of like you do for someone else what you could have or should have done for the other person that is no longer with us. By the way, indirect amends could also relate to making amends with someone who's passed on into the other life. Living amends is probably one of the most important ones, and I love the concept. Living amends is me living my life one day at a time to try to be the best that I could be in every aspect. Not perfect. No, I'm talking about following God in these steps. And that would be my best chances of mending the relationship with the people I've harmed. Okay? Because you're going to find that some people, you can't go back to them and find them anymore. But you really mistreated them. So praying for their salvation, praying for them would be indirect. An amends in kind, and also a living amends. You might write a letter, and if you have an address, you would send it. So that's a little bit more direct. But some people, you write a letter, and it's like, no, I can't. I mean, I don't know where I'd send it, but you write it out. It's kind of a prayer letter thing. The principle in step 8 says we made a list of all the people we harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. That willingness is really important. So let's get into the book a little bit. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage in the past. This is page 76. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. Again, there's that metaphor talking about us directing this whole show ourselves, where the actor wants everything their way. And we could be kind, considerate, patient, but we could also be mean, egotistical, and dishonest. So we have died to ourselves. We no longer run the show anymore. It says, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. The will to do what? Step 8 and 9. And I would say that if you do this progressively, quickly, you're still going to be on the roll from having done steps 1 through 7 in like maybe 4 or 5 days. So just keep the momentum. It says, remember, it was agreed at the beginning, quote, it's italicized, we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol or any of our addictions. If a person's not willing to go to every length, then they're just not ready. And we don't, I think it'd be good to say this, is we don't beat up people if we're helping them. We just say, you're not ready. And I'm willing to work with people that are ready. I'm not willing to work with people that aren't ready. Why? Because it would just me trying to be their motivation for them. And as a professional, I have people that are more ready than others. So it's like, let's trade places so that when you're ready, then we'll get through the steps and we're not wasting anybody's time. Yeah, and if a person, there are about four things you can point to that would be so essential that keep people sober. One is if one's not surrendered, at any level, like they're trying to still control this, it's just not going to work. Two, if they're not willing to look at their defects of character and let go of resentments and fears, it's just not going to work. It also says many of us tried to hold on to our own ideas and the result was nil till we let go absolutely. So that fits the first one. We have to have total surrender. This one is if there are people that we are not willing to make, like I just can't face them, I can't do that, you're probably going to drink and use again. It's just that way. And the last one, interestingly enough, is a quote. It says, "Nothing will so ensure us against another slip as working with others." So that has to do with the idea that if you're sharing this message with others, you're going to stay sober. It says, probably there are still some misgivings as we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt. We may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Spiritual basis, we'll come to that. It's interesting. Let us be reassured. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature of our approach. We might prejudice them. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message, but our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set the right wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries. So when I first read this, it's like, are we off the subject? Are we supposed to be going and apologizing and making amends? This sounds like we're going to share the gospel or evangelize. That's how they thought it. They thought in terms of sharing what God was doing in their lives, that God was helping them away from alcohol, and that for them to go through and ask God's forgiveness and to have these defects of character, they would share, we realized that I needed to come to you and make things right. And I am so sorry for what I've done, or I'm a this or a that. And so God would come into it. It's really interesting. And here they're suggesting that it's okay to not share everything, so that you would be like too much evangelism. It says, but we don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we are willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. Okay, so that's the next thing. So yeah, it takes some prayer and meditation before you do this. And you're going to be asking God to give you the words, the way to make amends. And so God's all part of it. I think we'll go on and then get into the details. It says the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. It may be he has done us more harm than we have done him. And though we may have acquired a better attitude towards him, aka step 4, seeing him as spiritually sick too, we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. This is so fascinating. So, I might be sharing that I might be, well, the phrase in step 9 is we made direct amends to such people, except when to do so would injure them or others. So it'd be easy to say, well, I don't want to injure them by saying, I really hated your guts, and now I see. No, we wouldn't say it that way. That would be kind of wrong. But how do we say it? Like, I've been judging you, or I've been critical of you, or I thought this about you or that about you. Here's my thought is if, I mean, this is just my thought and how I've done things, but don't take that seriously. Pray about it, work with someone else and think. But I find that if I shared every critical thought I had with people, that would really just injure them. If I have distanced myself from them because I've been judgmental, I need to maybe reach out in love and kindness and interact more, or maybe give them a gift in secret, or refuse to try to judge them anymore. And by just praying every time I get a negative thought, to pray for them. That's mending the relationship. But if I find that God, the Holy Spirit, is guiding me to say, I need to humble myself before them and say, I'm really sorry. I haven't been as good a friend to you, or I may have had some negative attitude towards you. I think it would be important to do that. Again, each situation is really different, and you don't want to make it worse. But I think it's such a balance. Sometimes not saying anything makes it worse too. And I've had in this last year plenty of opportunities to have to go to someone and say, look, I'm really sorry, but I was really offended when you said this. Can we work this out? I might have not even said offended. I might just thinking of mending the relationship by talking about what happened. And the persons are usually so nice and want to get things, or we air things out in a kind way. I do think that there's some dangers of not talking about things. We have extremes in addiction. Don't talk. We won't talk about it because I don't want to offend anybody. Well, then we're just harboring resentful feelings, and then that stockpiles, and then we can't take it anymore. And when we get to next week, there's a phrase in step 11 that says, is there something with someone we should have discussed immediately? Or where we're keeping it to ourselves. And I think we have to pray about that. We were in a situation where I'll be very vague here because I don't want anybody to feel bad, but we hadn't seen some people in a while, and I felt like it would be better for us to see them, because the more we didn't see them, the more like thoughts and things could happen, which would cause a worse division. So just hanging out with them, hearing what they have to say, seeing what they're about, I think helped me connect more with them and understand where they're coming from. On another occasion, I took the risk of talking about something just to gather more information. Again, it helped me mend the relationship over there by trying to verify information over here. So here's the thing. If you're praying and your goal is to mend, it'll all work out. yeah, think in terms of mending. Okay, I won't go on and on about it, but I get excited about that because that it's really kind of a cool way to think about things. Um, it is harder to go to an enemy than a friend, but we find it more beneficial to us. Like, what are these people talking about? Like, they're actually talking Christianity to love your enemies. Like, why do we need to make amends with enemies? It's because that's how this thing works. And, and then it says, but we find it much more beneficial to us. That sounds like Christianity again. Like, wow. So these hard, difficult things. But here's the thing, if we work to mend the relationship with an enemy, and maybe they're not an enemy anymore, we get gobs of grace. We go to Him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Yeah, criticism and arguing is not making amends. Simply, we tell him that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. So we're honest about that. And I always thought it was funny working with lots of addicts. They would say, I'm sorry, I have to make amends or I won't stay sober with you or stay sober. And it's like, okay, not quite sure what that's about, but that's how they work their program. There was one concept I wanted to share before. Well, yeah, if it's harder to go to do this, think humiliating, think humbling. That's how you know you're doing this. If it's easy, you're probably not making amends. You don't need to make it harder than it is, but it's humbling. That's what each of these steps in theory does, is humble, humble, humble. And on your own time, you could pray about step 1, see how it's humbling, 2, humbling, 3, humbling, 4, 5, 6, 7, humbling, because they're all, and that would be a little good side video to talk about each aspect. 8 and 9, humbling. 10 and 11, humbling. Yeah, yeah, because there's nuances in each of them. God gives grace to the humble, but He is opposed to the proud. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Really, nothing worthwhile? I can't skip this step? Nope, it doesn't say that. Never trying to tell him what he should do. This is like the exact opposite of codependency. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. And these people are funny. They will tell us kind of what will happen. And it's kind of true. In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we are calling upon admits his own fault. So feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. And I hear people talk about it that way. And that's why, we talked earlier about this is really hard to do, but this is love. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. That's a promise. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally, they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. So, yeah. So as I do this, I feel somewhat hypocritical. I do. I got into really a frustrating conversation with someone. It might not have been a conversation. It might have been me being upset with them. And they were a company that provides service to me. and I didn't feel like the service was really that good. And if I shared with you, I might have some sympathizers, people saying, wow, that doesn't sound good. But that's beside the point. If I apply what we just read, um, I would have to go and make him direct amends to them, apologize for my part, never pointing out what they did wrong. And so I went to do that today, and I still pointed out what they did wrong, and we cycled it again. And I don't know if I can stay with the company. So because I felt like they, in all honesty, they apologized over and over and over, and I felt so intent on making my point heard that what they did wrong. So again, am I losing grace? I could be losing grace as we speak. So I'm going to have to find a way to make amends. It could be not calling them up for a while. It could be that the best thing is for me to switch companies. Otherwise, you're going to expect something good, and I'm just going to be mad at them all over again. So sometimes we have to make amends by changing the situation so that I'm not going to hold a resentment towards them. Parting company, but wishing them well and praying for them and not seeing them as bad people, but seeing them as people just like ourselves that are spiritually sick, that we live in a fallen world. Like, really, if I weren't a perfectionist, and that's a defect of character, this would all work out well. But because I want the world the way I want the world, then it all gets kind of wacky. So most alcoholics owe money, or any kind of addict. You might find that there's people you owe money. We do not dodge our creditors, telling them what we are trying to do. We make no bones about our drinking or whatever addiction. They usually know it anyway, whether we think it so or not. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it can cause financial harm. Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. By the way, Debtors Anonymous, an incredible program where this is what they struggle with. And I've heard more stories where when they go and do their amends, that miracles happen. I mean, they even get fired. They get not fired, but hired by the person they're making amends to, just confessing that they were dishonest years ago. Just bizarre things. But if you invite the grace of God into your life, great things will happen. Our drinking, well, arranging the best deal we can, let these people know we are sorry. So sometimes amends is made in installments, kind of pun intended. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors, no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them. Perhaps we have committed a criminal offense, which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we are divorced and we have remarried but haven't kept up on the alimony to number one. She is indignant about it and has a warrant out for arrest. That's a common form of trouble too. By the way, this is the olden days, 1940s. Yeah, child support will come up. What are, working one-on-one with first with a friend in the program, a therapist, a coach, a sponsor is really important, because we may not know we even need to make amends. But here's some common ones, like for people who struggle with sex addiction, like what about the people they harmed by looking at pornography? They certainly probably shouldn't go into them in person and try to make amends. So indirect amends, like giving to a charity that helps women out of sex trafficking, could be appropriate. Say like we were greedy with food and sitting down to a meal, our eyes were always, it sounds horrible, but I can relate to this, thinking how much more I can get out of the nachos than the family members fighting over food. So making amends there would be, you know, making sure that everybody else gets their, I don't like the word fair share, but let them have that. And it would be a secret amends you do every time you sit to eat. Um, it gets too cumbersome to have to explain it to them. Well, I'm sorry here. You know, sometimes we have to. Sometimes it's best to just say something like that. Money. Gamblers will take money from kids' lunch money or instruments for, they'll pawn things. And it's a very painful thing to have to make amends, to say, I'm sorry, but this is what I did. The question is, do I tell them everything? Like, would they be harmed if I actually shared more story? I think, again, on a case by case basis, but sometimes we don't realize we're helping them get unstuck when they only have half the picture and we won't disclose everything. It's like people having blood sugar problems, and I won't disclose that I'm a diabetic. Yeah, no, they need to know that. On the other hand, if knowing something will make things worse, that's probably something we take to our grave, or we share with someone else or pray for them. Say, like, we thought about taking money so that I could go buy liquor, but I didn't. Probably not useful to tell them that. But say, like, the kids know I was drunk at, say, like, their birthday party, and for years didn't admit it. Now I admit it. Under this simple phrase that I lied to you many times, I was not there for you at your ball games, or if I was there, I was drinking. Often tears start to come in both sides, but they're healing tears. It's like I'm putting this out there in reality. And when we so confess our faults one to another, that we may be healed, and that's part of it. And so it's very powerful. I've seen it, actually. It's really rewarding work. The weirdness of it is I have so little to do with it. It seems like God has everything to do with it, but I wrestled with some, I can't divulge, but I wrestled with some alcoholic parents who really were wrapped around the axle, and I was getting kind of wrapped up with them. I didn't even, I mean, it was just bad. They were sending me certified letters, firing me, and there was kind of a court involved. And I said, look, for you to see your children, I think you need to make amends. And he blankety blank, I don't need to make amends, blah, blah. And it's like, well, then you can't see your children. I mean, talk about not a fun type of therapy. But he then wrote an apology, which sounded like, and this isn't really divulging too much, but it was like not the right kind of apology. I'm sorry you made me do that. Or I'm sorry your mother made me do it. It's like, oh, I just wanted to scream. Have to pray and say, God, please help us here. I got this idea from a friend who's a fellow therapist, who said, why don't I just took all his words that he wrote. It was kind of like Scrabble, put them in. And I said, look, and I read it and it sounded pretty good, like an apology letter. I took out stuff. I said, these are your words. I didn't actually change anything. If anything, I added a period or something. I said, these are your words. Could you read this? He says, oh, yeah. Because it's weird. When I backed away from it, and I was mad, and I was certainly earning my dollar with this thing, I felt like the kids could be benefited if there was an apology. So anyway, this day happened where the man read the letter, he really never felt that his kids were that harmed. But the tears flowed. It was like incredible, just incredible. I had love for the guy. I certainly had love for the kids. The kids had love for their father that they had never had. The dad never could go back to making this story up that his ex-wife just made him into a monster for no reason at all. No, he owned it. It was just like amazing. And I share this, it's actually like so many stories. And that's what it's like. And the fruit of that is he just drove miles to see the kids. The parents of the kids got along better. The mother says, I don't know, I've never seen their father like that. Yeah, no, that's how this works. I get that a lot. People don't think, thankfully, they don't thank me so much because it's not about me. It's really about their experience with God in these steps. And then you realize therapy, traditional therapy can't fix these things, can't fix dishonesty, broken relationships. Just try harder not to drink or spend or do bad stuff. But when you open your hands up and you say, God, help me. Okay, you want me to go to this person? I'm scared to death. But you know what? I'll do it. In fact, there's a colorful phrase that says in AA, you can't save your face and your ass at the same time. You have a choice. If you want to be saved, then you can't look good while doing it. And that's what Ninth Step kind of has. And it turns this war and interaction on its it just turns it on its side. It just can't, because it's breathing life into it. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are general principles we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we've decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what those personal, what the personal consequences may be. Yep, that's how it is. It's like you don't care to save you don't care to save face. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life. I love that phrase, meaning this is how we live now. Had secured a position and was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, but if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. So here's the thing. The man himself would have been praying for God's guidance, his helpers. Usually there were two sponsors, so the phrase "we" suggested. And we, probably Bob and Bill, or Bill's friends, those early AAers. And that's what he did. In this case, it was an indirect amends. Ask forgiveness. There is some value to not being direct sometimes because a letter gives people time to think and to not respond in anger. He did, and he also sent a small amount of money. He told her that he would try to do what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. The weirdness, the thing about this, and it's now coming to me, this important point, is that now it is. Yeah, now it's coming to me. It's like resentment is like a card game, and I'm holding cards. And I don't want to let go of this card because I want to be able to lay it down when I want to hold something against someone, to get even or to get advantage over. Amends and this program is like dropping all the cards now. It's like I'm going to make myself vulnerable to you. It's not like I'm going and here's the target, shoot an arrow here so that I can go to heaven as a martyr. But it's more like it's okay for me to be vulnerable. It's okay for me to go to you and stop the tug of war, stop the game back and forth, and to just say, here I am. I'm really sorry about what I've done. I think that's why we're somewhat afraid to do this, but I think it's just spiritual warfare. But it's what we do, and when we do it, amazing things usually happen. Because in that vulnerability, in that weakness, God's power is perfected. This is an interesting story. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. Thus, he used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. He felt that he had done a wrong he could not possibly make right. If he opened the old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? After consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to take those risks than to stand before his creator guilty of such ruinous slander. He saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, or he would soon start drinking again, and all would be lost anyhow. He attended a church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. His action met widespread approval, and today he is one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. Yeah, again, another powerful story of through prayer, and you get guidance, you start to mend these troubles. I will also say that amends, in my experience, don't really take a long time. You pray, you prepare, but it could be 5 minutes. You really can't go on and on and on and on and on and on. If it's one of that's like therapy, where maybe a family's discussing what it was like living with the alcoholic parents or something, and that's mending. But I'm talking about the formal amends of I'm apologizing to you for the way I've mistreated you. And for the kids to hear this, to hear that you are confessing that you're an alcoholic, that you've found help from God, and that you really are controlling or too sensitive or screaming and yelling or grudge holding or whatever, and you're seeking to not live that life anymore, and you're asking for forgiveness. And I've thought about this, asking for forgiveness is asking something from them. And I think sometimes it comes across as quick, give me forgiveness, where perhaps we go to apologize and we don't necessarily have to ask for forgiveness, but we just want to mend the relationship. And if people want to talk afterwards, they can, but as a professional, I kind of say it's usually shorter and sweeter. Save a discussion for some other time. And the reason is because then it can go into a discussion back and forth, and then we start pointing out their flaws unconsciously, and then it starts to fall apart. I think there's some value of structuring this with do a role play, write it out, and certainly pray about it before you deliver it. Domestic troubles. Perhaps we're mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to be advertised. We covered this a lot in I need to, okay, folks, bear with me here. I lost my link there. So yeah, with affairs and stuff, you could almost do a whole, in fact, I should show you how this works. Yeah, so I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I look for the book. Here is the book. It's right here, Into Action. And sorry if I'm making you dizzy there, but we'll go down. So yeah, you could almost do a whole hour on that. And I do think getting with the professional, you know, if you've suffered sex addiction or something like that. Same thing with some other addictions like compulsive gambling and spending. You know, there's complexities to some of that. But we use this book because it really has some really good things. I think for the sake of time, I'm just would let you read that on your own. But I do like this one phrase. The design for living is not a one-way street. Yeah, that's a really good, powerful one. It says, perhaps there are some cases where utmost frankness is demanded. Yeah, I love this. And I get a picture, even though there is no picture, but it could be a cartoon. It says, the alcoholic is like a tornado, roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife, he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" This happens. I see it. And I gently, sometimes not so gently, God forgive me, but I say, hey, you just did this, this, and this. Well, she should forgive me. But it's like, when was you had an affair, you were doing that with that person like a month ago? No, this is craziness. But that's how addiction is. We get so upset with the other person, we're convinced that we're right and they're wrong. And yeah. So I will say this last year, 2020, and some of the things we face can really be helped by this. And, you know, steps 10 and 11, which we'll get into next week, really are about doing this all the time. So when I say a ninth step is the big one, but every day I have to look at how do I need to make amends with someone and apologize. Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Again, they're really so precise. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. It's really an important concept to think that what part do I have in it? And that's really a four-step question. Like, I could be mad at family members or people I know that do blah, blah, blah. But what part do I have in this? Again, if we went political just for a minute, it's so easy to blame the other side, but what part do I have in the alienation? What part do I have in the mess? People may go, oh, well, I had nothing to do with the riots in Seattle or whatever. Maybe I should pray about that and ask, what part did I have in it? Maybe I didn't pray enough. Maybe I didn't concern myself. Maybe I have had such indifference to things. Now, I think we have to find balance. To try to take responsibility for all the sins of the world gets to be pride. On the other hand, we go to, well, that's the sins over there, and I didn't do anything. Yeah, it's like it's like kids. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. It's like the mother or the dad is just trying to figure out things, and we have one person jumping up and down saying, "I didn't do it." We are at our best when we say, "I did it." In my faith tradition, we just remembered the prodigal son story. The prodigal son, if most people know it, even if they're not really aware of the precise story, is you have the son who ran down the path of ruinous living, ends up in a sty and says, it's better that I go back to my father's house. So he goes trying to mend ways with his father, and his father runs to him and throws him a party. Meanwhile, the oldest son, who never did anything really wrong, is like beside himself, like how can you do this? This doesn't seem fair. Well, guess what? God's ways aren't fair, and thanks be to God that they aren't. So how does that self-righteous older son make amends? Probably by humbling himself, seeing what part he had in things. Maybe the prodigal son could never catch up with the goodness of that son, and they were just dividing like that. In family systems, we call this the family hero and the family scapegoat. It just works that way. We'll conclude, we'll conclude with some powerful ideas here. It's also important. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation, as would be steps 10 and 11, that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. So if you're praying that, you're making amends, you're working the program. And it's repetitive. You pray it over and over. I was praying that the other day. It's like, you know what I need is patience, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like I need to fix something, but no, I'm supposed to be patient. In fact, the situation I brought up with the company could be that I'm not patient and tolerant. So, the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Our problem often is we're trying to theorize, intellectualize, think it. It doesn't work that way. This is an interesting side note. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. By the way, those of us who are parents, and if we have addiction, if we start to have a transformation through these steps, it will be a powerful witness to our children that God does exist. He can do anything. There may be some wrongs we never fully right. We don't worry about them if we honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen, so we send them an honest letter. And there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases. Okay, so that's that earlier thing I mentioned. But it says, but we don't delay if it can be. We don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our own feet. On our feet, we don't crawl before anyone. This is one thing I kind of think it might be okay to not be dramatic, but I think if we err, let's err on the side of humility. This is how I'll conclude tonight. These are called the promises. You could write the promises there. A lot of any meeting you go to often will read the promises. The promises, when I first looked at this, I thought were for all the steps. It just, this is what you'll get. You could almost diagnose an addict of any sort by the opposite of these things. But I then learned that this was what you would experience before you're halfway through doing step 9. So it says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Powerful. And it talks about step 10, which we will deal with next week. I wish you all great recovery. Again, I apologize for not finding a better way to communicate that I wouldn't be there last Tuesday, but it is what it is. Feel free to subscribe to us if you want to. It's one way to get actually a number more features. It gives us, the more subscribers, it opens up certain things. Let's see. Oh, that's the wrong one. That's for sex addiction recovery. But you can email us at eric@ericboland.net. And anyway, I wish you well. You have a good one. Bye-bye.